Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I am so geeked today to have this opportunity to be with Dr. Chanequa Walker-Barnes. And as I see the numbers rising on attendees, I know that I am not the only one. So I want to welcome you to the United Church of Christ Nurture for the Soul webinar series that occurs every Thursday at 3:30 Eastern for an hour. You will notice that we have quite a few people on, and we like for this to be interactive. So I'm going to ask that if you have questions that you want me to try to get to, that you place them in the Q&A and not in the chat. I try to keep up with chat, but that's very difficult for me to do. So if you can place them in the Q&A, I will know that you have questions. Dr. Chanequa Barnes, what a joy and an honor it is to share this time and space with you today. I was introduced to you and your scholarship in 2014 with the release of your book, Too Heavy a Yoke, which became a proverbial lifesaver for me and others in the aftermath of the killing of Michael Brown Jr. and on the heels of the killing of Trayvon Martin, closely followed by Oscar Grant and Tamir Rice and Sandra Bland and Eric Garner and all those joining a long line of named and unnamed human beings violently removed from this world too soon. Compounding that with the violence of racism and sexism and heterosexism and induced poverty facing communities of Black women daily. I want to thank you for that work, even though that's not why we are here today. Following that work, your seminal entry into a womanist perspective on racial reconciliation, and I bring the voices of my people, gave sound to muted voices and hope to wearied souls. And now, just in time, I know this is not about me, but I'm gonna take this moment to talk about the impact of your work on my life. I'm just gonna start there. And now, just in time for my long overdue sabbatical, you offer a journey into the sacredness of self-care, a book that will accompany me on my time away and serves as a poignant reminder that we are more than the sum of our parts. We are more than we produce, and that our bodies matter. So although I see you very irregularly, I feel like we're besties, like you get me, like you know what's needed in this world. And I am so grateful and honored to welcome you into this space. Welcome.
Thank you. You know, it's always good when we get together. And I'm looking forward to this. I'm honored to be here. I know there are many friends joining us. And yeah, I'm excited for the conversation. And I can't tell you how excited I am to know you are going on sabbatical.
I am. I am. I start October 1.
Oh my goodness.
You are one of my last engagements before I leave for sabbatical. And actually, I'm going to leave the country for 31 days to try to just breathe, right?
Yeah,
breathe.
yeah.
And so I think it's so, for me, it's so fitting to have this daily guide that will rise with me every morning, right? And we'll talk a little bit about not just me in that, but in this thing that women do, right?
Yeah.
That sanctifies our struggle. So we'll talk about that when we get to that. But I want to begin by asking you about the journey. I was struck by the statement in the introduction of this book that there can be no spiritual life that does not engage the body. And I was struck by that. It hit me, Dr. Chanequa. It made me think about our theologies of self-care and the lack of them, right? Yes. So even from the beginning, a statement like that, it made me think about growing up in context where the goal was all about escaping body and getting a new body somewhere
Mhm.
else, right? And not worrying about this old body because we were supposed to wear it out. We even have songs that talk about, there's a leak in this old building, talking about the body. And so
Yeah.
I wanted to know if you could give us a little insight into your thought process around that and how it led you to this writing.
Yeah, so really, this is a continuation of the story that began in Too Heavy a Yoke.
Mhm,
And in many ways, it is a continuation and a summation of my own personal journey of self-care
mhm,
over the past 20 years. I began my career as a clinical psychologist,
mhm,
and part of my training, actually starting as an intern at the CDC, was looking at this connection between mind and body and understanding that our experiences, stress, and other experiences, trauma, impacted our health and well-being. And so
mhm,
I think when I moved into theology and went to seminary, I began to see that same thing, right? This that very often we talk about the body as though it's separate
mhm,
from the spirit. We say we're not supposed to do that, right? We criticize that in kind of church history and the way that that has happened, but there's still a way in which we do it. And so as I entered into a lot of spaces as this psychologist turned theologian
mhm,
who was walking alongside activists and people in community development and urban ministry and congregational leadership, I often saw people extending themselves for ministry in ways that did damage to themselves.
mhm,
And that often did damage to their relationships, right? It didn't just stay in the body; it filtered out into a breakdown of relationship. I was in seminary when a United Methodist pastor in the area committed suicide, and I saw, even without knowing him, I saw the ripple effects through that conference, right? And so all the while I kept thinking there's got to be a different way of approaching the way we think our bodies than what many of us have internalized from the church.
mhm. That's good. I I was thinking about that also in connection with there's been a new rash of Black women in leadership who have been dying,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And it's been called to our attention because of the prominence of their positions. And I'm not suggesting that I know anything about the physiological or psychological stories behind those things, but it is alarming, right?
yes.
In the United Church of Christ, there's a predecessor that I have that walked off of a plane after an international flight and dropped dead in the airport. Since I've been here, there's been a colleague who died at his desk working late into the night. And so this concept of always having to produce more, the
Yeah,
holiness of the grind,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
It's hard for us to escape. And so I'm grateful for this piece, but what are you seeing? I want to call attention to something you said because it's important. You said you started as a clinical psychologist
Yeah,
and then you added pastor.
yeah.
I don't want people to miss that because sometimes we think those that if you're a pastor that you can be a psychologist or I'm just saying, right?
Right.
Sometimes we think that with
Yeah,
that seminary degree comes all these other things,
yeah,
but you carefully delineated that I started with this body of work and now I do this as well. Those are two
mhm,
separate callings, two
yeah,
separate things. Okay, we're gonna put that
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so how do you how so yes, in the first book, you lay out for us the burdens that we're carrying. You call us to face it,
Mhm,
that this is what we are doing,
yeah,
and that is not holy, and that is not called for, and in some ways, it's from the pit of hell, actually.
yeah,
And so now you're moving us into, and now what can we do about it?
yes.
right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the book from your perspective in that way.
Yeah. So, starting with Too Heavy a Yoke and continuing from that and moving into the work of racial reconciliation and racial justice in the church, I often found myself in spaces where I was the voice of self-care,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I was constantly, urging people to practice self-care. In Too Heavy a Yoke, I lift up self-care as sort of an antidote to the burden of the strong Black woman. But one of the things I began to realize is that just saying that term self-care didn't necessarily translate into people understanding what that was. And very often, especially as sort of corporations got onto the self-care hype and started marketing products to people, I began to see this talking about self-care in ways where folks always assumed it meant spending money or it meant traveling somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I would often say, no, I'm talking about something more basic than that. I'm actually talking about how we honor the gift of the body that God has given us. And while the some of the luxuries around that are wonderful, it doesn't do a great job if we're pushing off self-care until we can take the trip, until we can do the day at the spa. That what we need to do are these practices daily, weekly, on a more regular basis that are sustaining us and that are giving our bodies what we need. Thinking about the deaths of the two college presidents, the two Black women who were college presidents who died very suddenly last year. I think those are high profile examples of what have been happening for a lot of people, particularly people from marginalized communities. I know many cases of Black women, professional Black women, that this has been happening to for many years. People that say we didn't even know there were any health issues going on, right? Folks just dying on the job, not even making it to retirement. So this idea that, we're going to work so hard and then eventually we will reap the rewards of our labor and we'll get to rest later. Many of us are not making it to later because of the way that we are treating our bodies now.
There are quite a few people in the chat who are talking about this merging of body and spirit, right? And how the body is temporary. Michael is saying, I'm not quoting you directly, Michael, but that our body grows and changes and ages and wears out, but the soul remains, right? Then Marielle talks about we won't make it to later because of how we're treating our bodies now. Maybe you see some of that. That self-care should be a spiritual process. I want to invite you to talk a little bit, though, about what we say theologically and how we live theologically, because I don't think that those always match up.
Yeah.
Right? It almost feels as though we often have theologies of sacrifice that we have to do these things. We have to push to the next thing. I'll own it. I am wrestling with that at 60 now, that I want to live differently and accept that I don't have to be everything for everybody, even if they want me to be that, right? And so you've been pretty transparent about some things in your life if people follow you. And I watched your journey and celebrate with you the healing of your body and the conquering of cancer. I have a brother that I've chosen who lives with HIV and has since the 80s. And I am absolutely convinced that it is love that has cured him, that is being surrounded by people who love him unconditionally, that has caused him to be able to thrive. And I see from a distance that same kind of love surrounding you, right? Can you, to whatever extent you're comfortable, can you talk about how writing this accompanied you in your journey?
Yeah. Yeah, this is part of my ongoing journey, I think, in some ways, to try to save my own life, right? Because of the ways I've internalized such negative views about my body and the way in which success and striving for success and sacrificing myself on behalf of others, other organizations, other people is part of how I've been socialized. But I was first diagnosed with cancer, and the word "first" is significant here. In 2014, actually, about a week after Too Heavy a Yoke came out, I was diagnosed with cancer, and so immediately went into treatment. And this is also around the time that we are seeing the rise, right? The beginning of what becomes the Black Lives Matter movement. And there was a point where I was stuck in a hospital bed when something happened, right? Like 2014, I'm stuck in a hospital bed. All these people are doing all this activist work, and I'm struggling with the fact that I'm stuck in this bed,
Mhm.
right? And I can't go out and do the work. And I recall coming out of surgery and immediately telling my husband to give me my phone because I
Wow.
needed to see what was happening,
Wow.
right? Um, and even at that time, I was talking about self care, I was writing about it, urging others to do it. But within about a year after treatment ended, I found myself overwhelmed, overextended. Um, I mean, immediately after I ended treatment, I went back full tilt because I was like, I want my life back. I had that year of having to slow down. I want my life back. And I just went full speed ahead. And before I knew it, I was feeling the effects of it. There was a point at which I felt my body was toxic, right? I said something, and I thought something is going to happen to me because I feel toxicity. I feel it physically, I feel it mentally, I feel it spiritually. I feel toxic. And that was when I was diagnosed with a recurrence of cancer.
Wow.
If a first cancer diagnosis is a sort of, hey, I'm trying to get your attention, the second one is just really destabilizing. And I found myself wrestling with God in a way I hadn't with the first diagnosis,
Mhm.
and really wrestling deeply with myself, with my relationships, and saying, what did I not learn? Right?
Mhm.
What did I not learn the first time? And I want to say, not to say that the second diagnosis was in any way my fault, but I knew how stressed I was feeling and how I had felt that my body was going to do something bad, right? Something bad is going to happen to my body. And that has to do with how I'm living. And so that really forced me to wrestle deeply with what it meant to be human,
Mhm.
what it meant to be a disciple, what was the point of wearing myself out to the point of death, right, for the sake of ministry, especially as an activist, right, as somebody committed to racial justice. Like, I'm part of the world that I'm trying to improve,
Mhm.
right? I want us, like, health is a human right. And if I'm actually doing violence to myself, I'm actually supporting the oppressive system that doesn't want me to live anyway, right? And so for me, kind of coming back from that second diagnosis, it was really okay. I've got to think radically different about about my body and what it means to be embodied.
Mhm. That's really good. That's really good. So let me ask you a question about that. In the time when you were wrestling with that, um, did you have thoughts? Because I've had moments in my life when I couldn't do what I thought I was supposed to do, and somebody else did it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how else to
Yes.
say that, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they did it better than I would have done it.
Right.
And I've always attributed it to almost like a mini God syndrome for people in
Yep.
pastoral ministry that um, that we think God needs our help.
Yes.
And we can't let God down.
Yeah.
As though we are the plan, right? Did you have any insights? Because the work continued, right?
Yes.
The work continued. The protests happened, the things
Yes.
happened. And not only that, but you're sitting where you were, I believe, I'm speaking prophetically now, I believe, created the space for you to birth greater contribution.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. And I have thought about that. The way in which what my contribution would have been if I hadn't been forced to sit and wrestle would have been, it wouldn't have been my unique contribution, right? It would have just been that, yeah, I mean, and not to say it's not important, but I think it forced me to really sit and say, I can't do everything, right? I can't do all the things I want to do. What is the one way? What is the one contribution I can make? I think fear of missing out, like, is very real.
Yeah.
In terms of ministry, in terms of academic spaces, activist spaces, this idea that we want to be everywhere because we're so concerned about what might happen if we're not there, right? We're concerned that the great thing won't happen because we didn't put it together. Or sometimes we're concerned that the great thing will happen because somebody else put it together and we won't get to
Tell the whole
experience it,
truth.
right?
Tell the whole truth. Okay, yes, yes.
And so there's that element of it that we're constantly judging ourselves for what we are and aren't able to do, and whether we can do it like that other person did it, right? And so, yeah, I think part of it for me, also the self-care, was I had to be comfortable with my walk. And I had to accept my walk with God is my walk with God. And it takes its own map, right? It takes its own path. It is unique. It is not what other people are necessarily doing. It takes its own timing. And for me to learn to settle into that, as opposed to wanting to be and put, have my foot in everything, I think it was a significant step in my self-care. And honestly, it wouldn't have happened if not for that second cancer diagnosis. Again, I'm not one who thinks, well, God made that happen to you for you to learn that. No, I'm not that. But I am one who, I often say, I have a Jacob spirit. And if something happens to me, I'm going to wrestle my blessing out of it, right? And so for me, that was part of it. It was like, okay, I did some wrestling and this is what I came out with.
But I also want to lift in that, Dr. Chanequa, I'm trying to be respectful, but I'm saying Dr. Chanequa, I also want to lift in that, yes, wrestling one's blessing out of it, which you did very well, but you also modeled for us paying attention to one's body.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that our body doesn't give us signals. It's that we push past them because we feel that we need to.
Yeah.
There are a couple of questions I want to get to because I could ask questions all day. Michael Young has this question. Christina Cleveland, who introduced me to your work, coined the phrase white male God theology. How do you see that being lived out in the church?
Oh my goodness. Yes, it is lived out in the church. It is the dominant theology lived out in most of the American church, even if there are no white men present. Right?
Oh. This is a truth. Go ahead.
And I think that has to do with the body. I mean, I think it really does. And this idea, the opening video, it talked about I am becoming sacred, right? I am becoming sacred and holy. I think it is white male God theology that teaches us that we're not already sacred and holy, and that somehow the way we become sacred and holy is by pouring ourselves out for the sake of other people, and really more for the sake of other people's power is what we are taught to do, right? So that's what productivity is about. It is about building up other institutions, building up other people's power, building up other people's wealth. And so we've learned to think that our productivity lies in our value lies in our productivity as workers, whether it's workers for corporations or workers for the church. We have all internalized that idea. I think that is the white male God theology that pervades many of us in the US. And part of the undoing of that, being a womanist theologian, is learning how to recognize that each of us bears the imprint of God's image, that we're already good. God said it, right? After all of creation, God said it is good. But then when God got to humanity, God said it is supremely good, right? And for us to recognize that and to own that, and then to say, I don't actually have to prove my worth. As a disciple, I am inherently worthy because God said so.
Ashe. I always like to lean into and remind myself that the first time we read in scripture, God saying something is not good, it's when God speaks to humans being alone,
Yes.
right? Being without companionship.
Yep.
And I'm not going to gender that. I'm just saying that everything is good.
Yes.
Until we get to the part where you have to do this alone.
Yeah.
And yet we feel like we have to do it alone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is really good. Carolyn Collins wants us to share some of the daily practices of self-care that are in the book. And I will do a little bit of that and invite you to do that. But I do want to let you know, for those of you who are joining for the first time on one of these special webinars that I do to highlight books that I think are critical to our development, that you will have the opportunity to win a book. We always give away 50 books. This is the book, Sacred Self-Care. I'm backwards on the thing, so I hope you can see it. And we have ordered those books from an independent bookstore, as we like to do. And there will come a time when I'll ask you, give you the information to be able to send your name, and the first 50 people whose names we receive will actually receive Dr. Walker-Barnes' book. We like to do that to support. But I will talk a little bit with you about the design of this book, because that's why it's accompanying me. That's why it's all set up for my daily devotionals, right? And to help me incorporate practices of the book. And I love that you begin by not assuming everyone knows what self-care is. Can you talk about that a little bit, sister?
Yeah.
That we don't even know what self-care is, right?
Right.
Because I do a massage every month. I try to do a massage every month. This certainly releases tension. For a long time, I called that my self-care ritual. But it didn't care for all of myself.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And like massage is one of those, it's a great example, because if you can get a monthly massage, right? That is a form of self-care, and that it is helping to relieve pain, relieve tension. But if the other 29, 30 days of the month, you were doing things to increase your pain and tension.
Girl, I would have my cell phone on the massage table trying to answer a text that couldn't wait, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So part of what I do in the book, I begin by explaining what self-care is and why it's connected to discipleship. because I recognize that many of us have have been socialized to think that bodies are bad, that our bodies and our souls are separate, that one is good and one is not, right? And that our job is to be more soul-like, soul-led, as opposed to led by the matters of the flesh, right? The reality is, though, that we can't experience life without our bodies to the extent that we know it. The only way we experience God, the only way we experience each other, the only way we experience existence on this life is through the body. And so I begin by making that connection and talking about the ways in which our bodies are important, and the way in which I think for Christians and for me, what was helpful for me in learning to take care of myself was recognizing myself as a gift from God and saying, my body is the first gift from God I ever received, life, right? And this is the thing that carries me through life to the other end. And I've got to take care of it because it's the only thing I've got. And so it's my best gift. All the other gifts that I received from God come through this body.
So,
And so
can I lean into your pastoral piece about that for a minute?
yeah.
It's just a thought. Maybe some of your clinical psychologist piece too. I wonder when it comes to Black women, I'll even say women of color in this particular instance. I wonder if that some of the ways we struggle with self-care are because we have brought with us understandings we had to create at a time when our bodies were tortured, at a time when our bodies were mutilated, at a time when our bodies were owned. Maybe we had to sanctify the struggle to be able to hold on to God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
If that
Absolutely.
burden breaking work, if the burden wasn't holy, then what kind of God was allowing it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And we need it. I mean, for much of our history, we could probably say that we needed a theology that let us separate body and soul because our body was the site of oppression. And so we needed to think of our soul as somehow disconnected from our body, that our soul was experiencing the freedom that our body couldn't experience, right? We needed ways to justify our body's treatment, right? And to be able to say that we can handle it, we can handle it into many ways. Our survival, our presence here today is because somebody at some point decided they could push through. Right? Like it is because we are the product of people who decided that they could keep going. So yeah, for us, it is not the lack of attention to our care. It's not that we're just, we're thoughtless people, right? There is a heritage here that for many of us teaches us not to be concerned with issues of the body, because that's not where you experience life, because the body was often the site of so much pain. But that is a trauma response. And part of what has happened is we have now normalized a trauma response, because the trauma response was the normal response for hundreds of years. And in many ways, often still is for large segments of people of color, Black and Brown communities. That's still the case in many ways, right? But part of the work of not solving, but sort of integrating trauma is learning how to live anew and develop new relationships with our bodies and our stories. And so I think that's the work that self-care can help us to do, is to begin to teach us a new way of relating to our bodies that is not the story that oppression taught us, which is that our bodies were worthless, or that to the extent that they were worthy, it had to do with, could we make money for somebody? Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point.
Mariel Thomas asked the question, how do we deal with and push away the guilty feeling that one can feel when we engage in self-care, especially women of color? How do we lean into radical self-love without guilt or shame?
In the beginning, you may not, right? Self-care, I really believe, is subversive. It is countercultural. And so you will often feel guilt or shame because that is a part of how we've been socialized. Sometimes people will place guilt and shame on you because it is a way that they get you to fulfill their needs instead of your own. So self-care, I feel guilt about self-care almost every day.
Wow.
Every morning that I wake up and I wrestle with how I'm going to spend my time, and I try to decide, I have to make a decision every day. Am I going to do my meditation? Am I going to stretch? Am I going to do the things I need to do to start my day well? Or am I going to rush to get off to work because I feel like they need me, right? I feel like there are things I owe to other people on this day. I don't know that I'll ever get that guilt completely out of my head. But I do know that the more I confront that guilt, and each time that I press through it and say, I'm gonna do my self-care anyway, I prove that that guilt is a lie, right? Like, and it might just be for that day, right? When I say, no, I'm actually going to do what I need to do, and then whatever gets done today for other people, it'll get done. It'll take care of itself. The most important things. Each time I do that, it builds my capacity to do it again. So that next time the guilt is a little bit less, but it's really about sometimes even fighting that internal voice and sometimes the external voices that tell us, you can't afford to do this. You got other things you need to do. So yeah, I don't know that it'll ever completely go away.
So Donna asked the question, Donna Van Hook, is there such a thing or practice as radical self-care? Are self-care and self-preservation synonymous practices?
I think self-care is radical, especially when it is connected to our self-preservation. Especially for those of us, if you are a person of color, if you are female, if you are queer, if you are trans, if you are disabled, if you are an immigrant, we live in a world that says, for all of those reasons, right? We live in a world that says you're not worthy of care. You're not worthy of society's care, and you're not worthy of your own care. So I think self-care is radical each time we reject that message. I think that's where the radicalness of it comes in. And I think it is self-preservation. And not just self-preservation. I mean, Audre Lorde already told us that is a political act, right? I believe that firmly. It is a political act for marginalized people to live and thrive.
So Dr. Cassandra Gould asks the question, can you talk about the practice of meditation as a form of self-care and how it has helped you? She says she has been listening to your meditations, especially body scan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you. I have been meditating now for 20 years, and I say it is probably the most important tool in my self-care toolkit. And that is because particularly the type of meditation that I practice is our mindful-based meditations. And that helps me to pay attention to my body because I've really been socialized away from my body. When you talked about, Reverend Traci, not paying attention to our body signals, I probably suffered from fibromyalgia for 8 years before it was diagnosed. I wasn't paying attention. And I'm one of those people, if I go for a medical visit and the nurse or doctor asks me about a symptom and says, how long has this been going on? I can never tell them because I wasn't paying attention when it started. I didn't pay attention till it got so bad that it grabbed my attention. And I was like, okay, wait, now I can't ignore it because it's gotten so severe. But I've been walking around with lots of symptoms and I normalized it. I didn't pay attention to it until somebody asked me, how are you feeling? And then I might say, oh, wow, look at that. There's pain there. I wonder how long that's been there, right? And so, yeah, so for me, it starts with learning how to pay attention. So meditation gives me a way of paying attention. I mean, it's really a sitting, checking in and noticing what is going on with me. When I'm feeling upset or stressed, to notice that. When I'm feeling angry, to notice that. And then I can say, oh, what do I need to do to take care of that? But yeah, for me, it's a way of training my attention so that I notice my experience in the moment.
I love that. I will confess along with you an embarrassing thing, and please do not write me and tell me to do better. I don't need that. But the truth is, from 2014, when Michael Brown died, until 2023, I did not even take the time to do a mammogram. And it wasn't intentional. It was that I have to schedule it and my schedule's booked. Do you know what I'm saying? And so when I finally showed up, they were like, what? What? How did this happen? What? And it is a ludicrous thing, right? It's a few minutes. I can't take a few minutes to care for myself. Do you know?
Yeah.
These are the ways that I can't say these are the ways that I have embodied things that are not holy under a holy guide, right? So I know I'm not the only one. I can't be the only one.
You're not.
And
Yeah.
so then people find out they have cancer in stage 4. I'm a nurse. There's 3 stages before 4. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And these meditation, I don't meditate. I maybe should try that. I may be a little bit too ADHD for that. But meditation and things that make you tune into your body are ways of entering at a different stage. That's one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Someone saying they understand, they're feeling convicted as well.
Yeah.
I do want to spend a little bit of time letting you talk about the format of the book, but there's another question. Are we perhaps responding to the constant effort to belittle us in every way, that we choose not to present as strong, not stepping out of place into personal victory?
Yeah, quite possible, right? We wrestle with so many societal messages about, and sometimes family messages or messages from school. There are a lot of ways in which our existence as humans teaches us who we are, who we can't be, right? Even the idea of not being able to give ourselves just enough of our time to go get the mammogram or to sit and meditate. It is really amazing that this is what we do to ourselves, right? Like this is really the essence of life, is survival and preservation. And yet we have managed to teach ourselves that those basic functions of what we really need to do to live and thrive and love each other, that those are the luxuries, right? That it's these other things we have to do first, and then maybe we get some time for that afterwards. So I think many of us, we have internalized this idea. Yeah, I've got to be strong. I can't express need. I can't give myself my time.
Well, in looking politically at what is happening, there are those who are really saying we want to legislate your disposability. I mean, that is really what's happening, right?
Yes.
We
Yeah.
want to make sure that you don't have enough money to eat, that you don't have enough money to have a house, that you don't have enough money to take care of your basic needs.
Right.
And in order for you to barely survive, that you work yourself to death
Yes.
because you are not deserving
Right.
of good
Right.
life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's
there's
the structure of our world, you know. I mean, today I was listening to NPR talk about the new COVID vaccine and how it is no longer being provided free by our government. And I thought, if we were a society that valued health, that really truly valued public health, the vaccine would be free because we would know it's what people need, right? But no, we say you have to prove you're worthy of health care.
Mhm. You have to prove that you're worthy of God.
Yes. Oh my God.
This is
Yes.
what, you know what I'm saying?
And
Like,
that's the fundamental, that's the one that underlies everything else.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I want to talk, and if you have other questions, if you put them in, I'll try to get to them. But this book, Sacred Self-Care, I want you really to, if you're not one of the 50, don't let that stop you from buying it. I want the other 70 of you to still buy this book because it's going to help you. And Dr. Walker-Barnes has laid it out in a particular way that really resonates with me. So it's divided into 7 weeks, and each week has a daily meditative thought. And at the end of the chapters, you are invited, and some even at the end of some of the daily things, you're invited into a practice, or you're invited into a thought to make it your own, right? To make it your own. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I knew is that very often you talk about being a nurse who went for 9 years without a mammogram. It wasn't because you didn't know you needed a mammogram, right? But that there were obstacles or barriers, even if maybe it's our own, proclivities that do that. Very often we know what we need for self-care. Like we at some basic level, many of us know what it takes to take care of the human body. But there are all these things in the way. And as a psychologist, I was trained to treat the resistance. Right? If you want to help people to change their behavior, you first have to address the reasons why they are in this rut, right? And why they have trouble doing that. And so I wanted to begin by addressing the barriers to self-care. So a lot of the book is designed to help reshape our understanding of what self-care is and to help us recognize what our obstacles are. And then again, because I'm a clinical psychologist and I want to move people in the direction of behavior change, I knew that I had to break that down into small, doable bits so that people could achieve it. It wasn't something so overwhelming that I can't fit it into a busy day. So the book is divided into 7 weeks, and each week has a theme. The first week is really kind of laying out what self-care is. And then the other weeks are about either barriers to practicing self-care or things that we can do that enhance our self-care that we might not always think about. So there's a section on self-compassion, which is really important because many of us, especially like the type of people who are on this call, many people in ministry, the ways we treat ourselves, we would never treat another person.
Now that's true.
That's
true.
We would not consider it loving to treat other people the way we treat ourselves. And
Mhm.
so, and that goes from the way we talk to ourselves, the ways in which we convince ourselves we have to do other things to prove that we're good. It has to do with how we think about our own emotional experience and the way we kind of, stuff our experiences, repress them so we can just keep going through with the work. It has to do with how we use our time. And so each week is divided into then these 7 days of taking little bits of each thing and giving some food for thought. And then there's a practice. And the practice sometimes is saying an affirmation.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's doing something a little bit more involved. But again, I wanted it to be something that was achievable, which meant it had to be something small,
Mhm.
right? That's what, as a therapist, when we want somebody to change behavior, we give them one step and we say, do this one step. And when they do that and they experience it and they can bring some consistency to it, we say, okay, and now we're going to add something. But we don't give people too much at once because then that makes people feel helpless. They're never going to be able to do it. And so they give up and don't even try. And so this is about building one step at a time and also trying things on so that you figure out what you need. Learning, it's teaching you how to pay attention to your needs.
Mhm. I love that. I also like the piece after the week, where you ask a self-reflecting question, to engage, because I read a lot of self-help books. I might highlight some things, right? But I'm really looking at this book as a companion
Yeah.
because it's a daily open up. I don't have to read the whole thing at one time. I'm really excited about that. And so people are saying that they bought the book, and I'm really uh, happy about that. I do want you all to know that when we give books, we do purchase them. We purchase them at the price that the author, because that is also a way of loving on one another, honoring the work of other people. And we want to do that in a way that is just. Um, we have just a few minutes left. Someone has a question. Um, Julia wants to know, she said, I bought the Kindle book. Is the audio book you reading? Because if you're reading it, she'll buy that too.
No, it is not me reading, but I did get to help pick the woman who reads it, and so I think I'm not a trained voice actor, and so short of me reading it, I think she's the next best thing. I gave the publisher some very clear guidelines about what kind of voice I wanted to read my book.
What is your thought about the need for people in ministry? And I want to shy away from just saying pastoral ministry,
Mhm.
because there's stress in all kinds of ministry, right? What is your thought about the need for a therapist, um, if you're doing ministry?
Yeah, I tell the students in my intro to pastoral care class, I tell them that every minister needs a therapist and a spiritual director.
Mhm.
And you need the therapist um, even before you think you need the therapist, right? You need to have the relationship with the therapist before you actually need the therapist. And the reason for that is that ministers, regardless of where the context of ministry, we hold other people's pain,
Mhm.
right? And you can't hold other people's pain without it affecting you. This is something I had to learn as a therapist. I realized at some point the stories I was hearing were changing me. I was
Mhm.
experiencing vicarious trauma. I was starting to parent based on things that I knew happened to other people, right? I was raising my kid as if I had lived through the trauma because I had heard so many traumatic stories. And so it's important for people in ministry to have therapists where we can process what we're holding in a safe capacity. And it is also important for us to have either a spiritual director or a pastor, our own shepherd, who can help us to listen out for how God is continuing to be at work in our lives.
I also want to insert there before we hang up that increasingly I spend a lot of time on social media. It's a part of what I consider my way of speaking into the world, even though it's just little clippets. It's not as focused for me. It's like it just comes and I do it real quick and go back to what I'm doing. But I do notice that one of the cautions of social media is that it takes us through so many emotions so rapidly that we don't process any of it. So you can, something pops up and it's this horrendous murder. And then the next thing is a birthday party. And then something pops up about abuse. And the next thing is, a fashion show. It doesn't allow the mind time to be cared for or the heart to be cared for. And I'm paying attention to that, right? Because that is also a part of self-care. We're coming to the end, and I would invite, do you have your book with you?
I do.
I want to invite you to read one of your prayers as a way of closing us out. Because the other thing I love about this book, good people, I'm sorry, I forgot to put the thing in. Oh, Laura just put how to get the book. So if you'll email my assistant, because I will be on sabbatical, if you will email my assistant and just say you were at this conversation and put your mailing address, you will receive a book to your home. It's our expression of gratitude for the work that Dr. Chanequa Barnes Walker has done, and also for your attendance here. But I thought we might close today with you hearing from Dr. Walker-Barnes, one of her prayers, whichever one you want to read. And one of my favorite questions she asked after this sacred care, self-care is sacred, what does that mean week? She asked the question, what is your reaction to thinking about self-care as a form of subversive stewardship? I love that question.
Yeah.
When you get the book and you read, then you'll be able to engage that question. I want to thank you for coming on with us, Dr. Walker-Barnes, and if I can find a way to have you in a space in person, Lord have mercy. If you could have like a 3-day retreat, I think it would be much better. All for it, and people gonna be calling me saying, "When you gonna do that?" I knew it was gonna come. We need that. We need to take time away and care for ourselves, and so I want the last voice heard to be yours. Close us with a prayer.
I will, and I would love to do that retreat, but after your sabbatical. Receive this benediction. May the Spirit of the living Christ fall fresh on you, inviting you into a new way of life, one in which you abound in care and love for yourself, for humanity, and for all of creation. Go forth with the assurance that God's love for you is for you. Dwell in that love as you seek to love your neighbor and to love God. Be revived, be renewed, be resurrected. Amen.
Amen. God bless everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Siblings in Christ, if you were moved by this conversation, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or has nurtured your soul for the journey, please consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help to provide programs like this, which are an essential part of our ministries in the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed on your journey, and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.